Welcome to Mating Matters, the podcast that looks at human behavior through a lens of evolutionary psychology and human mating strategies. This episode I like to call Slut Secure. It came about because I was cruising the internet, as most people do, and I found a website with some language I hadn't seen in a while. The website had these words: "Are you finding yourself in over your head, trying to balance this world of relationships, sluttiness, sexy possibility, love chemicals, and secure attachment? Know someone who's caught feelings when they didn't want to? Have you tried not to catch feelings, only to have your stomach and heart tied up in knots after having great sex with great people?" Apparently, this website offers courses on how to have conscious non-monogamy. It got me thinking. We're at this time in our history where in many Western urban cultures, we actually have an oversupply of female mates in the mating marketplace. It's not that there are more women than men. It's just that women are becoming more educated and starting to make more money. It's not a surprise to learn that for every 2 men that graduate college, there are 3 women. The last census here in America showed that there are actually more women in the workforce than men. Of course, we need more women in boardrooms and in ownership positions, but we are earning money. How does this impact mating? Well, women do not like to date down. Patriarchy lies in their own heads. Maybe they have a Cinderella complex, but it's very difficult for many women who are high achieving to date a man who makes less money or has less education. I think the more evolved women are starting to realize that that's the way to go, and to have a best friend and lover and helper in the household may be more important than a paycheck. But in the meantime, all these women vying for so-called alpha males means that in the mating marketplace, men are starting to call the shots. And if one model of male sexuality is have multiple partners, then it would make sense that there would be a service provider in our culture in today's times to teach women how to behave more like men. Now, I say this cautiously because, of course, we have the widest range of sexual behavior of any primate species. And, of course, there's going to be a very small percentage of women who, want multiple partners, are comfortable with non-monogamy, etc. So let's be clear. Those women are out there, but they're not the majority. But here's a website selling courses to women on how not to catch feelings in their sexual relationships. I want to remind you that our attachment system evolved in us as a survival mechanism. Babies needed to attach to parents, literally for their life. And in adult lives, we attach in a secure way, hopefully, to adult romantic partners so that we can reproduce. Catching feelings is natural, normal, and it's selected for in our evolution. So my guest today is one of the owners of that website. I wanted to talk to her about how and why she teaches women to be more slut secure. Without further ado, let me introduce Misha Bonaventure of something called Bonobo Network, or some people call them bonobos. What do you go with, Misha?
Bonobo Network. That's how I say it.
Bonobo Network, which is an online community that involves classes to help people make sex-positive connections and in what you call a non-monogamous world. So first thing I want to know, Misha, how did you get involved in this?
Good question. Many years ago, I started looking at what I wanted to do in life and started exploring what would help me feel most fulfilled. And I went in lots of different directions, looking back and forth. And really what started emerging is that relationships are my passion. And I got involved in something called What is Erotic, which is a show, a cabaret show down in Santa Cruz, California. And that led me to the non-monogamous community up in the Bay Area. I started getting invited to events, and I started just becoming a leader in the community. And now here I am, teaching, coaching around how to be in relationship and how to be in sexuality, pleasure in your best relationship.
And I know your answer, but why did you name your community why you named it?
Yeah. Well, bonobos are known to be one of our closest ancestors, along with the chimpanzees. The difference between chimpanzees and bonobos are some interesting differences around matriarchy society, around using sex as conflict resolution. There are just some really interesting connections between bonobos and humans, and then also the bonobo behavior and how we could be doing relationship differently. So that's why we are inspired by the bonobos.
I interviewed one of the leading authors on polyamory and primate species, and he loves to call the bonobos the make love not war cousin of ours versus the chimpanzees we know who are highly aggressive. In fact, the first thing they would do if they came upon a nursing mother is kill the baby so they could make her fertile again, and they're very, very aggressive. So humans have something in between in our population. We have the widest range of sexual behavior of any primate species. And so I'm curious to know about the group that you reach out to, the group that reaches out to you, the people who are comfortable with non-monogamy. Are you comfortable saying that that's not for everybody?
Oh, for sure. Yes. I definitely am not an evangelist for non-monogamy. I'm more of an evangelist for what works, what works for you. And I think that our society has gotten into a bit of a bind in that we overvalue monogamy as a way of being, mostly because of religious teachings and things like that. And what we haven't, I guess my desire is for us to have a choice. And inside that choice, we can then do what works best for any one of us. And so for some of us, it is monogamy, or it is, diving deep, or even maybe for parts of our lives, it's more important to be in a more monogamous or pair bonded experience. But in other parts, or for some of us, it's really important to have multiple relationships. And I would argue that in some ways, like, creating family and things like that is so much better to have multiple people, potentially even multiple parents, to raise children. We've gotten so nuclear that we just don't have as many resources as we could if we had expanded some of the ways in which we think about relating and loving.
I will say this, we're definitely cooperative breeders, and we were always raised by extended family and friends and cousins. So you're spot on there. I have a question, though, that's a little bit sensitive. So I'm sure you're used to dealing with society's preconceptions. But I specialize in attachment theory. And your website has words like, know someone who's caught feelings when they didn't want to? Have you tried not to catch feelings only to have your stomach and heart tied up in knots after having great sex with great people? And I have an issue with that as a marketing ploy, because there's a huge part of our population who are either very monogamous or, because of early childhood trauma, have a lot of insecurity around attachment, and they can't have standalone sex without having an emotional, payback, emotional penalty at the end. Do you think it's possible to train anybody to be non-monogamous?
Well, I would say that I am not potentially inherently non-monogamous, but I have done a lot of work, a lot of self-examination in order to see where have I closed doors, or where does my attachment system need more security versus where does my attachment need more freedom. I guess what we're trying to say here is that often we are getting attached to people in ways that are not necessarily healthy, mostly because our hormones are making us drunk on connection, right? And so if we're just projecting attachment onto every single person that we're connecting with, that isn't necessarily healthy either, or at least like wanted. Mm-hmm. And so how could we actually create secure connection? So I've been making a distinction between secure attachment versus secure connections. And so how can we have secure connections versus necessarily secure attachment-based relationships? And how can we have choice? In Jessica Fern's book, Secure, she talks about having a choice between having an attachment-based relationship. And like that just blew my mind when I read that. It was just like, oh, can we actually start having a choice between who we're attaching to and who we're having a pleasurable moment with, or like seeing through like, oh, this person is wonderful as this part of my life, but they're actually not a good fit for me to attach to in a longer term relationship or have a child with, or, whatever it might be. But, yeah. Am I answering your question?
A little bit. I would think that if I look at it only through a lens of attachment theory, that you're going to find people who have a more avoidant attachment style, meaning that they love to seek the pleasure of sex, but emotional intimacy feels a little overwhelming to them. They would more likely be attracted to this community. Then when I hear you say, is it really healthy to get attached to everybody you have sex with? Well, some people are actually wired that way, and they probably shouldn't be dabbling in light, casual relationships, because Mother Nature designed these neurohormones for a reason. Our bonding and attachment system is a survival mechanism, and it's actually healthy to attach. We know that long-term committed people have better mental health, better physical health. They live longer. They accumulate more wealth. Now, within a healthy relationship, right? And I think what I hear you talking about, we may be talking about the same thing, is that when people are entering one toxic relationship after another, where their needs are not being met, where there is no trust, where they're re-injuring themselves with these multiple relationships, then that's not healthy, right?
Exactly. And it's not to say that non-monogamous people can't have multiple long-lasting, securely connected relationships. And so how do we make sure that those are the kinds of relationships that we're getting into, whether or not we're seeing them all the time, we're ready to move in with them, or we are moving in with them, or we have seen them over time for, we're actual friends with benefits instead of what normal society talks about or says friends with benefits is, which is like, I don't want to catch feelings. I don't want to have, we're actually not touting that people should not catch feelings. I think catching feelings is great. I think that's what we want to do with each other. Like we're trying to find connections. I mean, maybe some people aren't, but I think many people are trying to find real connections with people. And how do we do that for a longer period of time without trying to work out all of our attachment issues with each and every person that we're connecting with?
Yeah, and that's often what happens, is that unconsciously we will actually choose the people that will hurt us the most. My guest is Misha Bonaventura. You are listening to Mating Matters, the podcast that looks at human behavior through a lens of evolutionary psychology. I'm Dr. Wendy Walsh. We'll be right back. Doctor. The Dr. Wendy Walsh Show on KFI AM 640 Los Angeles every Sunday from 4 to 7 p.m., where we talk about everything in relationships. The good, the bad, the ugly, the smart. Whether you are looking for a relationship, whether you're looking to keep a mate, whether you're looking to recover after you've lost a mate, I have the science of love for you. You can download the iHeartRadio app and listen to the Dr. Wendy Walsh Show anytime. You can also hear it live every Sunday from 4 to 7 p.m. Pacific Time on KFI AM 640. Welcome back to Mating Matters Podcast, the podcast that looks at human behavior through a lens of evolutionary psychology and human mating strategy. I want to talk about, you mentioned society a few times and going against sort of what society dictates. And I hear you talk about us previously being cooperative breeders that, raised children in tribes, etc. And the fact that, and I've always said this in Mating Matters, that the modern nuclear family is a strange, recent phenomenon in our evolution. But having said that, what do you think the biggest things you're fighting against in today's society? What misconceptions?
Good question. I think some of the misconceptions is that this is all about sex. Like, I think sex is an aspect of this, but actually I would love for us to start thinking about relationship more broadly and really prioritizing deep, long-lasting friendships. I think there are lots of monogamous couples in long-lasting relationships that are sexless, and maybe that's not actually, maybe that's actually how we interact in ways that feel, I guess the part of me that feels like deep friendship is the filter that we should be looking through in relationship, rather than hot sex or, that kind of filter, which is often, I think, how we're thinking about like hookup culture and just connecting in with people is just like, oh, it's so much about just getting the hot sex. And really, that's only one little aspect of relating. And we could broaden our scope of relating in such broader means.
It's interesting because you're saying this as the voice, I assume you identify female?
Yeah.
You're saying this with the voice of a woman, right? And I think it would be a very different conversation if a man was saying it. And the reason why I say this is, I love that our species constantly adapts. It adapts to mating marketplaces. It adapts to hostile environments. During the last couple of years, we've all adapted to the pandemic by moving to Zoom and moving away from offices and having virtual meetings, etc. But what we are seeing now in modern Western society is actually an oversupply of successful women. We have, for every 2 men that graduate college, we have 3 women. This has been going on for a couple decades, the feminization of college campuses. We have, according to the last census, more women in the American workplace than men. And women are even surging ahead in what were considered male areas, the hard sciences and engineering, right? They're now close to 50% there. And they certainly are in medical schools and law schools. So what happens when women achieve financial freedom, economic independence? Suddenly, they do not have to bow to society's pressure to maintain any kind of purity or virginity. All that's out the window. But the other thing is, women still have a fertility window that men don't have. And as a result, they are being pressured to sort of find somebody who will be there if indeed they do want to reproduce. So I guess my question really is, right now we have an oversupply of successful women in the modern American mating marketplace. Do you think this idea of conscious non-monogamy, having a number of partners, is designed because men can call the shots sexually now?
It's a good question. I'm not sure that I'm prepared to answer that one. I do think that there are different reasons and potential motivations for having non-monogamous relationships.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm guessing you are correct around the desire or the need or the desire to have children and the window of time, which is real for
mm-hmm.
women.
Mm-hmm.
And I do think women are taking back their sexualities, and that sex and sexuality, the freedom of expression around sex and sexuality is such I think an important aspect for all genders, and for us to start really being self-expressed in this way. I actually say something like, I think we're in the teenage years of exploring this aspect, or the equivalent of teenage years. I'm sure that we are screwing things up. I'm sure that we're, we don't have all the answers here yet. And I think that this is a really beautiful time where exploration of a new kind of relating is happening on a level that hasn't happened in our recent history. And I think, as we start to understand how to have secure, long-lasting relationships with multiple people, that we will see families opening up. We'll be able to see that there are family systems that are happening, that are pods of people that are connecting in and able to create family, things like that. So that's my best answer.
I know we really can't know the future, although it does feel like we're heading towards a matriarchy. If we could just stop buying guns and doing wars, but
crossing my fingers there.
Exactly.
Yes, I would love that.
But the only sort of concern that I have personally is I always get concerned when it feels like females are being asked to adopt a male model of anything and call that female freedom. Right. And so I love that you're talking about friendship and connection and women exploring their needs and calling the shots. Because an idea of simply, I see guys in their dating profiles just write, I'm practice conscious non-monogamy. And I'm just like, ladies, that's a guy that just wants to have more than one woman. And he wants you to behave like him. And at the same time, I have heard women who really want a committed monogamous relationship, but they're near the end of their fertility window, say, well, I'd rather share a man than have none at all. So I don't want women to also feel that pressure, Yeah,
for sure. And my hope and desire is that there is not a coercion or an unconscious coercion happening here, of course. My desire is that everyone feels empowered to have the relationships that they want, and that we're doing it in ways that relax our nervous system, that help us to feel safe and secure while also being able to be free and self-expressed as much as possible. And that is the place that I stand for. And that's the life and world that I want to create. And I'm sure I have my own biases as well. So
before I close, I want to ask you about a few specifics, because on the website, it advertises, do you know someone who's caught feelings when they didn't want to? Have you tried not to catch feelings only to have your stomach and heart tied up in knots after you've had great sex? So it feels like that language is that catching feelings is a negative thing. Do you believe that?
Yeah, I actually caught that copy and decided to change it for this next class that we're doing, because I agree with you actually that catching feelings is not a bad thing. I think sometimes people might I think premature attachment, which is what we were talking about, has high potential. Or we have high potential for premature attachment. And premature attachment what we've been calling premature attachment is like, oh, I have all of this new relationship energy, and I am going to project all of my hopes and dreams onto you, and I'm going to try and fit you into whatever hopes and dreams box that I have without actually checking with you, without actually figuring out if we're compatible, without having a fight or, some kind of conflict that we've actually resolved and been able to get through and have deepened our intimacy, things like that. So like, to me, that's what creates long-lasting, connected, grounded relationship. Catching feelings for somebody too fast can create difficult, people can put themselves in situations that later they're like, oh shit, who am I actually dating here? Maybe this isn't actually the person that I want to be with, but now I am attached to them. My attachment system is in, and now I'm going to work really hard to try and make it work, even though we're not we're not
and that's very much the story.
Compatible.
That's very much the story of 30% of Americans who have an anxious attachment style. And when they do move too fast and have sex too quickly, they do get bombarded by the neurohormones, the cocktail of neurohormones called lust and passion. And then when those neurohormones start to die down and their brain gets accustomed to it, they forgot to fall in love first, so then they're trying to figure out who they're with. So my prescription is normally for those people to just slow things down. But do you have another technique that you teach people, like to repress or suppress their feelings if they're catching them?
No, slowing down is definitely one of the biggest techniques for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, I also think that the avoidance are getting into these big diving into the relationships, and then I think what's happening on their side is they're getting into non-consensual relationships. And so all of a sudden they're in this relationship and they're like, oh, I didn't actually want to be deep in this, in this anxiously attached relationship. And that's why they're like moving away and needing to turtle themselves and take care of themselves. Because that's just a defense mechanism as well to keep themselves safe.
And by nature, they have an avoidant attachment style, so they don't have the emotional ability to sort of set the boundaries and explain at the beginning. And isn't it fascinating that the anxious person and the avoidant person always find each other? They could be the only two people in a crowd of 40 people at a party, and they find each other.
I know. I love those anxious avoidant couples.
They're in
trying
so
to
much pain.
Work it out. Yeah.
Yep. But we grow in relationships for sure. Well, Misha, thank you so much for joining us on Mating Matters, the podcast that looks at human mating strategy through a lens of evolutionary psychology. A pleasure. People can find you at bonobonetwork.com. Is that right? Did I get it right?
That's right.
bonobonetwork.com. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Mating Matters. I'm Dr. Wendy Walsh. We'll see you next time.